I stood motionless as the sheriff hammered an eviction notice onto my door. Beside him, HOA President Leonard smirked, his smugness thick in the chilly morning air. They'd taken my land through bribes and deceit, convinced their plan was foolproof, unaware that my father's badge outweighed their shaky authority. Leonard's wife, Margaret, the HOA's self-proclaimed enforcer, screeched from across the fence, her polished nails clawing at the wood as she demanded I rip out my repulsive tomato plants. Her voice oozed privilege. Kneeling in the dirt, hands still muddy from tending my garden, I was baffled by her outburst. These plants, grown from seeds my late mother had saved, were my refuge, not an eyesore, and well within my property lines. I stood slowly, brushing soil off my jeans, and faced Margaret. Calmly, I explained that HOA rules allowed my backyard vegetable patch, but her fury hinted at something beyond mere appearances. She spat that rules could change, then stormed off, her dark hair stiff despite her fit, leaving me uneasy about her veiled threat. The next morning, a bright orange notice stabbed into my lawn accused me of a property violation, claiming my garden encroached 3 feet into community land, a blatant lie, as my deed confirmed. Across the street, my neighbor Ethan, an unexpected ally, jogged over, whispering that Leonard had held a secret HOA meeting the night before, attended only by his loyalists, to redraw my property line overnight. My stomach twisted as Ethan added he'd overheard Leonard scheming with Sheriff Carter, mentioning hefty campaign donations to make my problem property disappear. Carter's re-election signs peppered the neighborhood, including a huge one in Leonard and Margaret's yard. Thanking Ethan, I pocketed the notice and retreated inside to unearth my property documents. I snapped photos of the garden and boundary markers, emailing a sharp rebuttal to the HOA. Their reply was quick and arrogant. My records were outdated per a mysterious new survey, demanding compliance within 48 hours or face penalties. Heart racing, I called my lawyer. As I awaited his response, a truck roared up outside, disgorging workers who charged toward my garden with tools. Racing out, I confronted Leonard, who stepped from behind the truck with a clipboard, claiming enforcement of HOA violations under the covenant I'd signed. His thin smile dripped with venom as he declared the land no longer mine. I protested the lack of notice about any new survey, but he shrugged, citing a newsletter I'd supposedly missed. My phone buzzed with my lawyer's urgent advice: don't let them touch anything. I relayed this to Leonard, feigning confidence despite my rising panic, but he laughed and called Sheriff Carter, who rolled up in a patrol car, thumbs hooked in his belt, nodding to Leonard like a trained hound. Carter muttered about a disturbance complaint, though no one had called, dismissing my deed as an HOA matter. As workers tore out my plants, tossing my mother's legacy into trash bags, Margaret watched gleefully from her window, phone in hand, likely filming my ruin for the neighborhood rumor mill. I begged to transplant the plants, but Leonard sneered that I should have thought of that before breaking rules. Something snapped inside me. Years of fighting my own battles gave way to the realization this might need my father's help. Retreating inside as the destruction raged, I dialed Dad, hands shaking. His voice, steady with 15 years as Fairview County's police chief, promised he'd arrive tomorrow after I detailed the HOA's theft and Carter's complicity. Through the window, I watched them hammer stakes along a new boundary, swallowing a quarter of my yard. An email popped up, a community improvement project, announcing luxury condos on stolen land, including mine. My garden was just the start. The next morning, Ethan huddled with me in my kitchen, whispering in awe as we watched Leonard direct a surveyor planting more stakes deeper into my yard. "Is your dad really the police chief?" he asked. I nodded, sliding my laptop toward him. 20 years in law enforcement, 15 as chief in Fairview County. Last night's research had uncovered a web of fraud. Property reassessments, zoning requests, and a development contract signed by Leonard, revealing the HOA's real goal, not just my garden, but half the neighborhood, slated for a massive condo project by Crestwood developers. The doorbell startled us. Through the peephole, I saw a delivery person with an envelope from my lawyer, a cease and desist order accusing me of meddling in HOA business by documenting their actions, threatening a lien on my house. Ethan protested they couldn't do that, but Sheriff Carter's signature on the order suggested otherwise. He'd been bought, likely persuading a judge the new lines were valid. My lawyer urged an immediate counterfiling, a process that could take weeks. Then a big SUV pulled into my driveway. My heart leapt as Dad stepped out, his chief's uniform crisp, his gaze sweeping the scene with the intensity of a man who'd faced criminals for decades. "Don't tell anyone who he is yet," I whispered to Ethan, wanting to uncover Leonard's full scheme before playing our trump card. Dad entered without knocking, his presence filling the small kitchen as he hugged me briefly, then turned to the papers scattered on my table, demanding I walk him through it all. For the next hour, we laid it out: the garden dispute, the sudden survey shifts, Carter's involvement, and the condo plans I'd found online. Dad's face darkened as he called it a textbook land grab, an HOA front for a real estate scam targeting my corner lot for its dual street access. Outside, Leonard argued with the surveyor, pointing at a map, and Ethan noted something seemed off with their layout. Dad's phone buzzed with a background check. Leonard had ties to Crestwood from 6 years back, and Carter's campaign treasurer was Leonard's cousin. A knock interrupted us. Leonard, flanked by 2 suits from Crestwood, demanded access to inspect my foundation for structural integrity, citing an obscure HOA clause. Dad, badge hidden, calmly countered it applied only to common areas, not private homes. Leonard's eyes narrowed, wary of Dad's knowledge, but he pressed on, threatening to fetch Carter to force entry. Dad mused aloud if Carter often meddled in civil disputes, just as a news van pulled up. Ethan's quick thinking had tipped them off. Leonard hesitated, retreating with his cronies as reporter Lisa Tran approached, microphone in hand, asking about homeowners forced out for development. With Dad's subtle nod, I walked Lisa through the ordeal: the garden, the fake survey, the condo plans, showing her the stakes, the ruined plants, and the cease and desist, highlighting Carter's campaign funds from the HOA's special fund. Margaret stormed over, shrieking that I'd violated HOA rules by talking to the press, but Dad's mild remark about free speech silenced her. When I flashed the development plans with Leonard's signature, her rage turned to pale shock before she fled. As the news crew left, Dad's phone rang. County records confirmed the property changes were improperly rushed, notarized by Carter's wife, and the condo project needed 5 properties, mine the linchpin. Ethan's phone chimed. An emergency HOA meeting was set for tonight, members only. Dad smiled, suggesting it was time Carter learned who he'd crossed. Then another courier arrived with a foreclosure notice claiming unpaid HOA dues for 6 months, falsified, as my bank statements proved, escalating their assault. Carter appeared with eviction papers, but Dad, stone cold, dialed the state attorney general and his SWAT commander, vowing no corrupt sheriff would evict his kid. Ethan gaped at Dad's badge as Carter approached my door, oblivious to the storm brewing. Rain battered my lawyer's office windows as she slid documents across her desk, pointing to tampered survey maps. Timestamps showed changes made just 3 weeks ago, a clear manipulation of county records for land my family had owned for 2 decades. She tapped another file. Carter had pocketed a $155,000 donation from the HOA's special fund right before approving the new surveys, and Crestwood had filed for luxury townhomes targeting my land and others in Oakwood Heights. My stomach knotted. This wasn't about my tomato plants. Leonard stood to gain millions forcing me out, and he had help. I called Dad from my car, thunder rumbling, as he revealed a pattern. 3 other homeowners had lost property to the HOA in the past year. All vulnerable, all for this deal. My corner lot was the biggest prize. Watching the HOA headquarters glow through the downpour, I learned from Ethan's text about an emergency meeting that night. Dad warned me to be cautious. These people were dangerous, crossing legal lines without fear. Ethan met me behind the community center, rain dripping from his cap, guiding me through a service entrance to a supply closet beside the meeting room. Muffled voices plotted my downfall. Leonard's voice cut through. My property was the final piece for Crestwood's construction, delayed by complications Carter had smoothed over with his helpful presence, greased by campaign cash. Margaret's laugh punctuated their talk of a $50,000 kickback once the deal closed, dreaming of tropical getaways while we scrambled for scraps. I hit record on my phone as the Crestwood rep pressed about me causing trouble. Leonard assured him Carter could arrest me for obstruction, a night in jail to break me. And tomorrow at 9 a.m., the eviction notice would drop, bulldozers following by noon. My hands trembled with fury, capturing their conspiracy, bribery, abuse of power, theft masked as HOA rules. Then my elbow knocked over cleaning supplies, bottles crashing loudly. "Someone's there," Leonard shouted. Ethan yanked me toward the back door, footsteps pounding behind us as we burst into the rain-soaked lot, Carter bellowing to stop. We split up, me diving between buildings, flashlight beams cutting the dark as I crouched behind bins, drenched, confirming the recording had saved, damning evidence of their crimes. At 6 a.m., blue and red lights flooded my street, 3 cruisers blocking my driveway, neighbors staring as Carter marched up with deputies and a news crew, thrusting an eviction notice at me for unpaid HOA fees and violations. Pure theater to cast me as the villain. I played along, bathrobe-clad and feigning confusion, producing receipts proving every payment, but Carter waved them off, giving me 48 hours to vacate. The reporter probed his unusual involvement, and as he blustered about duty, I stepped aside. Dad emerged in his chief's uniform, his presence a thunderclap. "You're a long way from your jurisdiction, Carter," he said coolly, turning to the cameras to reveal his identity and hint at state investigations into developer official corruption, spotlighting Carter's $115,000 HOA donation. Carter's bravado faltered. Leonard rushed to defend the HOA's bylaws, but I held up my phone, playing last night's recording. Kickbacks, falsified lines, luxury homes on stolen land. While Ethan brandished signatures from 23 homeowners for an emergency recall vote. Dad produced a warrant from the State Financial Crimes Unit. As investigators rolled up, Leonard and Margaret's unity shattered, her shrieking it was his fault as they were escorted to separate cars. Leonard's glare locked on me, a silent vow of revenge. As I told the reporter my story, starting with a garden, ending with justice, I didn't know he'd already triggered a backup plan.